Welcome to B2B Marketers on a Mission, a podcast for B2B marketers that helps you to question the conventional, think differently, disrupt your industry, and take your marketing to new heights. Each week, we talk to B2B marketing experts who share inspirational stories, discuss their thoughts on trending topics, and provide useful marketing tips and recommendations. And now, here's your host and co-founder of Einblick Consulting, Christian Klepp. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, where you get your weekly dose of B2B marketing insights. This is your host, Christian Klepp, and today I am excited to welcome a guest into the show who is an ABM champion for B2B brands, and he is on a mission to help them overcome their growth and engagement challenges with ABM, or account-based marketing. So coming to us live from Madrid, Spain, Mr. Declan Mulkeen. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to be connected, Declan, and I really enjoyed our previous conversation, and I'm really looking forward to this one. So why don't we just dive in?
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right. So Declan, you're currently the CMO at a company called strategicabm, and there you obviously provide ABM solutions for B2B tech companies. But what I really want to talk about is you posted something on LinkedIn, I'd say about 2 weeks ago, that got some incredible engagement, and that clearly had something to do with the topic of the post, which is around why ABM is not just good B2B marketing. So could you please elaborate on that a bit further?
Sure, Christian. Yeah, it was a post that kind of had been going around in the back of my mind for a long time, based on what I'd been, the conversations I've been having with other people, the kind of conversation I've been seeing on platforms such as LinkedIn, etc. So I thought I'd put pen to paper and create a carousel on LinkedIn and expand on it a little bit more in the text to kind of say why I believe that ABM is not just good B2B marketing, which some people out there are perhaps, hinting or kind of talking about it as being just another tactic, really. And so I think the main points I was trying to make in that post that seemed to kind of grab the attention of the audience was that ABM, it's a very different thing to B2B marketing. It's, first of all, it's much more than marketing. And that's probably one of the things that I always tell when we're talking to clients or prospects or just the wider market, really, that ABM it's much more of an organizational strategy as opposed to a sales or marketing strategy. So I think that's the first thing that makes it different. Very often the C-suite, i.e. the CEO, the CEO, the COO, et cetera, are involved in the conversation because it's about how do you move a company forward? How do you make that kind of leap forward in terms of growth, whether you're looking to win, you're looking to grow, or you're looking to retain your most important accounts. So that's really why the C-suite get involved. And I think it's also ABM, it's a bit of a misnomer, really, in terms of how the name account-based marketing. And I think probably that's what causes a lot of confusion, really, because when Bev Burgess, who invented the term back in 2003, I think it was, she was having dinner with some guys from Accenture and Unisys, I think, and they were talking about client-centric marketing. And off the back of that conversation, she kind of designed a new approach, ABM, and gave it the name account-based marketing. But really, it's much more of an account-based strategy, which encompasses sales, it encompasses customer success, it encompasses account management, it encompasses operation, it encompasses the wider company. Because ultimately, I always like to call ABM the great unifier. And by that, I mean, it's the one thing that everyone can unify and come around in terms of accounts, because, marketing hasn't done itself a lot of favors in recent years, inventing, different acronyms such as, MQL and SQL and all these kinds of acronyms that really have, and I'm as guilty as anyone else, really, of celebrating all these great things and saying, hey, look, sales, we just sent you 10 MQLs. Isn't that amazing? And sales are like, what? I don't want them. They're not of any interest to me, because sales know which accounts they need to win. Sales know how to win those accounts, and I think that's why bringing together ABM and sales is another reason why ABM is different to general B2B marketing. But there are many, many reasons, and I recommend people to look at the post, which we can highlight a bit more about that after the show.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that. That was a really great answer. You spoke about it a couple of minutes ago because you gave us a very, substantial explanation of what ABM is. But could you elaborate a bit more on what it isn't, just to dispel this myth or these misconceptions that people have?
Well, I think ABM, a question that I'm often asked is, who's ABM suitable for and who is ABM not suitable for? And, there are different definitions out there, but we as an ABM agency, the position that we take with our B2B tech audience is that ABM is suitable. First of all, there's 3 or 4 really key criteria. The first one, obviously, is you really need to be selling into mid-market enterprise accounts, as opposed to selling into smaller companies or selling into small SaaS startups. That's number 1. Number 2 is typically the kind of product or solution or service that you're selling, it's a complex solution. It's a complex solution that tends to have a longer life cycle. It's not a transaction solution. It's not that I can jump on your website, find the buy button, click 2, and buy 2. This is not an Amazon purchase. It's a complex solution, and by definition, a complex solution will have a longer life cycle, and also by definition, a complex solution will have multiple people involved. And unfortunately, the world has changed in many ways over the course of the last few years, but one way that it's changed particularly is in that many, many, many more people are involved in a buying decision. And that's for many reasons. I think back to kind of pre-financial crisis of 2007, 2008, when people were making decisions and spending money relatively freely, relatively easily. But now there is a huge amount of risk aversion in companies. There is a huge amount of consensus building in companies. But also the fact is that there's an awful lot of technology. So therefore, any decision that gets taken these days, it has to be viewed in the sense of how's that going to impact our technology platform? How's that going to impact our customer service platform? How's that going to impact our CRM, our HubSpot, our Salesforce, our Marketo, whatever? So I think there's numbers talked about 6.8 people, 7 people, 8 people. The long and the short of it is it's not one person. And so if it's not one person, you've got to put a strategy in place, a go-to-market strategy that can reach all of those people, engage with those people, talk to those people in a different way, because a CFO will respond in a very, very different way to a CMO. And a COO or a CTO or a CIO or a CISO, these guys are going to have different buttons to press. They're going to be impacted, influenced by different messaging, different value propositions, different arguments. So it's not a one size fits all. And that's probably, when we say why ABM is a right fit or a bad fit, or not a good fit rather, it tends to be around those areas: complex sales, longer life cycle, you're selling mid-market enterprise, your average order value or your average annual contract value is at least $50,000. Otherwise, the investment in time and in money just doesn't warrant it. So if you've got a lower value order solution, other tactics, be they inbound, be they demand gen, etc., are probably more suitable.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, to your point about the multiple stakeholders involved in the buying decision process, I mean, like classic B2B, right? You brought up something that was really interesting just a couple of minutes ago, and it was on the topic of something to do with the salespeople. So, in your opinion, I'm just going to throw this one out there, but in your opinion, how does a discipline like ABM help to bring these two groups together, marketing and sales, to achieve those common objectives, and the common objective being revenue generation?
Yeah, well, like I said, I mentioned earlier, Christian, I think it's the greatest unifier that exists at the moment, really. Mm-hmm. I come from a sales background originally before I went into marketing. So, I've got the T-shirt, I've got the war wounds, I've got the battle scars. I've missed the last plane home. I've eaten badly in really bad hotels with bad linen. I mean, and that's probably being too kind to some of the hotels I've stayed in, actually, to say they had linen. But I've had all those kind of, terrible moments. And I think that's reflected a lot in a lot of the conversations I had with my fellow, my sales team in the agency that I work really closely with the conversations I have when I'm talking to sales leaders within our clients and within our prospects. I'm always very eager to be part of the sales process of the agency, because I think they want to hear my voice and they want to hear my stories, but they also want to hear the fact that I understand what it is like to kind of do the sales and win the business and equally to lose the business. So I think that kind of ABM, the fact is that we're all unified, we're all, part of the same focus, which is accounts. And that is, whether you want to win accounts, whether you want to grow accounts, whether you want to retain accounts, whichever the focus is, all three or one of the three, that really speaks to a salesperson, because their day-to-day work, their bread and butter is and are accounts. And I think when a marketer can talk to a salesperson around, hey, tell me which accounts you're working on. Tell me which ones you want to close this quarter. Let me go away and I'll come back to you and I'll tell you what I can do to help you close those accounts. That is magic to a salesperson's ears. And obviously what's not magic to a salesperson is hey, here's a few MQLs, or hey, here's a few SQLs, or hey, we've just done a new piece of content, or we've just written a new white paper. This is noise more than anything else. It has to be anything, it has to revolve around the accounts that the sales team are interested in.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, like, they have to see value in it. And then most important of all, they have to see, like, okay, how is this going to help me to close the account, right? Close the deal, get this lead through the funnel, as they say. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, you brought up that word, that dangerous word, a couple of minutes ago about like MQL. So the question is, why are leads and MQLs things that you should not be focusing on when it comes to ABM?
Well, the clue's in the name. So the clue is in the name, which is account-based marketing. So that if you're measuring accounts, the measurement of accounts is not MQLs. MQLs is, if you think about the evolution of where MQLs have come from, the whole kind of inbound marketing approach from content marketing, fishing with nets as opposed to fishing with spears, and all these other, ways of trying to describe something. But when you're targeting accounts, you need to have a new set of metrics. And those metrics need to be business outcome metrics, business focused metrics. And an MQL is not a business outcome metric. That's just a metric to explain that marketing are busy beavering away doing stuff. And it makes it sound good. But a business metric is, what impact am I having on the reputation of my organization within that account? What impact am I having on the relationships that we are creating or the relationships that we are nurturing within that account? What impact is my ABM strategy having on the revenue within the accounts that we are targeting? So the real focus should be around business outcome metrics. And obviously, if you Google business outcome metrics, this is classic business school. Anything that anybody who's looking to run a company, lead a company, influence the C-suite, talk to private investors, these are numbers and metrics that are universal. And I think going back to some of the other metrics, they are more, they kind of isolate marketing from the wider business as opposed to bringing marketing into the wider business. So I think that's probably why I'm so passionate about ABM, is the fact that I think it really brings marketing into the center of the organization rather than being somewhat on the outside.
Well, it just pushes marketing further center stage because it then becomes a strategic asset to helping drive or grow revenue, right? So, okay. Declan, this next one, I've basically taken a bunch of questions and put them all into this one bundle, right? And these are probably questions that you get, or you've heard them at least on sales calls with potential prospects and so forth. So this is probably nothing new to you. You get challenged by clients asking questions, and most especially because they're probably either new or they're just not familiar with ABM, right? So talk to us about how you would address the following. So I'll start with the first one. Okay, yeah, Declan, ABM's great, but we've got a really long sales cycle. So how can we show progress or success along the way?
Yeah, well, obviously, if they have a long sales cycle, then obviously ABM is a perfect fit for them, which will probably be my first answer. I think my second answer would be understood. I mean, we always talk about ABM being a marathon, and not a sprint. And I think if you're going to be preparing for a marathon, then you need to accept that there will be stages that you want to measure along the way, whether it's the 10K point, the 20K point, et cetera. So as any runner knows, you train up to do a marathon by running a 5K, a 10K, then you get to a 20K, and then you also go the full route. So I think one thing that we say to our clients when we bring them on board is, first of all, we're very open and honest with them, which I think is the most important thing. There's no point in trying to deceive people. There's no point in trying to say to people, look, you're so used to dealing with MQLs that you turn on a campaign and suddenly you've got 10 MQLs coming in your door every day. ABM is not like that, because ultimately you're telling us, well, we're working together and we're agreeing on a set of accounts for you to target. And those accounts, we need to move those accounts through this ABM journey. So having said that, there's two parts to this answer, really. First of all, going back to the kind of 3 R's, the kind of reputation, relationships, and revenue, there are a number of what we call lead indicators within those business outcome metrics that you can measure in order to see that you are moving the dial, in order to see that the revenue, which is the ultimate goal of ABM, that will come down the road in this ABM journey. So whether it's building the relationships, whether it's actually getting target account decision makers and buying committees to consume your content, whether it's getting decision makers and buying committee members to join your webinars or to join your executive workshops, whether it's getting decision makers and buying committee members to advocate internally about you, which is one of the key things around ABM, whether it's actually then seeing sales pipeline coming through, which then ultimately, depending on the sales cycle, which you mentioned earlier, Christian, that sales cycle, if the pipeline is there, then obviously we know whether it's a 3-month, a 6-month, a 9-month, a 12-month, an 18-month pipeline, then those lead indicators from a business outcome metrics point of view will indicate that revenue will arrive. That's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is what we tend to do with clients is we tend to put in place what we call tactical ABM. And what that means is that we're already kind of doing the kind of background work, the foundational work. We're working on your ICP. We're working on the account selection. We're looking at your insights around your organization, your industry, your sector, your competition, etc. So we're building all this data. We're then kind of looking at a new value proposition for you, which is relevant to your target accounts. So while we're doing all that work, which tends to take about 8 weeks or so, we're already building campaigns for you, which we call tactical ABM. And by that, we start spinning up some thought leadership. We start getting some of the key voices within your company to be heard. We start putting that content, which you probably already have in terms of different content, but we spin it up in different ways and we repurpose it to make sure that the audience that you want to see that content get to see that content very quickly. And that's already starting to build brand, to enhance your brand reputation, to reposition you if you're looking for a repositioning as part of your ABM strategy. So that's already starting to move things a lot while we're doing the heavy lifting with you in the background. So in answer to your question, Christian, there's 2 parts. Obviously, the first part I mentioned in terms of these early indicators, and the second part, obviously, is this kind of tactical ABM. So it's kind of a 2-pronged approach, really, in parallel. And then, obviously, the tactical ABM will continue when and as the more strategic ABM takes off and starts to deliver sales pipeline and revenue.
Okay, no, fantastic. So clearly, many ways to measure progress as you advance further in the cycle, right? Here comes the next one. You're gonna have a field day with this one. We may have to invest in ABM technology to implement these activities that you're proposing. So where do we start? With
ABM technology?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could be quite controversial. I would actually say you shouldn't start with technology. I think it's interesting. I run a podcast called Let's Talk ABM, and I remember last summer I interviewed Sangram Vajri, who's obviously the one of the co-founders at Terminus, and he's a really great guy. And one of the kind of quotes I remember from that interview I did was that he said, "You don't need technology to do ABM." And that's kind of really stuck with me since then over the course of the last 12, 13, 14 months. And he said, look, I own and run a technology business, but I'm the first person to say that you don't need technology. And I think that's also been our approach very often with clients when they come to us and say, hey, look, we're looking to buy this technology or the other technology, and we've been told we need it, and we can't do ABM without it, etc. So our answer always is, you have to have a strategy first approach as opposed to a technology first approach. If you can get your strategy right, you can do some very, very good ABM without any technology. Because ultimately, if you think about it, ABM at its core, in its essence, is doing the impossible to help your sales team to win accounts. Now, if you kind of boil that down and you kind of sit with your VP of sales and say, hey, which accounts do you want to go after? Or which accounts rather are you going after? And when do you need to close them by? Let me go away and think about how we can help you. So you may then end up deciding to run, an executive workshop. Now, obviously, you might need to do it might be physical or it may be virtual. You may need some technology to facilitate that, but you may not. You just may need some great people to come up with some great ideas and some great content around that, and you run a workshop, and that helps to move the dial on that account. Or you may need to, you've got some great content already created, and you need to personalize it for the account, for the industry, for the pains and challenges that account is facing at the moment. So that's just a good marketing job of taking that content and making it relevant and contextualized for the account you're looking to win. So there's an awful lot of things that you can do, which are, as I said, a strategy first rather than technology. Obviously Scott Brinker, who kind of creates that amazing infographic, which I'm not sure how he's going to keep doing it because there's already 5,000 logos on it. But he keeps on publishing it, and it's an amazing piece of work. The MarTech has exploded to such a point that sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. And I think we always say to people, pare back. Start small. If you've got, CRM, if you've got HubSpot, if you've got Marketo, whatever you've got, you can do an awful lot within that. And then if you've got something like Vidyard for creating video, we use a platform called Turtle for creating great content experiences. You only need 2 or 3 things. And if I think about my own ABM programs that I run, we have very little technology, because the main thing for us is really creating very special account experiences that allow the account to go through, which can be, a landing page that we've built in HubSpot. It can be a website experience. It can be a direct mail asset that we've created, and we work with our partners on creating an amazing direct mail piece that they experience. And so I think that's my answer in summary: is think strategy first, and then the technology will almost take care of itself, because the strategy will indicate what technology you need.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, with the strategy first approach, I interviewed a gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and his name's Dan McGaw, and he's in the business, of fixing the MarTech stacks of companies. Right? And one of the things that he says is that a lot of companies, to your point, they get tempted to just keep adding stuff to the pile, right? And at the end of the day, when they start doing an audit, some of them run up a really high bill on monthly fees on software that they very rarely use, right? Or just don't use effectively, right?
Correct. Yeah.
All right. And here's the last one of the bundle. All well and good, Declan, but how do we create all of this content that we need? This really sounds like a ton of work.
Well, it can be, but I think what we find when we do these audits of customers when they join us and they come on board, very often even the marketing teams, or at least the teams that are talking to us about ABM, they might not even be aware of the sheer volume of content that is already being created by their organization. And not only the volume, but also the creativity that can be done. And, I was looking at one client of ours the other day, and they had a podcast series that a lot of people in the organization didn't even know about. So this happens because a lot of these kind of large organizations, sophisticated organizations, they've got a lot of people doing a lot of great stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is always joined up. And I'm not saying it necessarily has to be all joined up, because obviously, different teams do different things for different reasons. But what I think is missing very often is, how do you bring that kind of content together in one place? And I think, a lot of our clients kind of create, and we help them to create, ABM centers of excellence. And these ABM centers of excellence are very, very much a repository for where great thinking, great ideas, great content can come into and share and be shared, and then people can pick it up and say, "Oh, I didn't know we had that podcast, or didn't know that we interviewed so and so, or I didn't know that we created an amazing white paper," etc., etc. So I think my first piece of advice is, go and find out what you've got internally. Have a good dig around. Google the name of your company and the word podcast. Google the name of your company and the word white paper. Google the name of your company and SlideShare. Just go and find, and you'll be quite surprised. Because then what we find is that we very often say to our clients, look, we're not asking you to kind of recreate the wheel or reinvent the wheel. We can actually take a lot of your content, and we can think about very clever ways of repurposing it. But the key thing for us is actually, because we've gone through all the work of the ICP, the account selection, we've created a unique value proposition which talks to your customers and your potential customers. We can then look at your content and say, well, how do we change that content? How do we use that content to reflect that message, that value proposition, so that it actually impacts and resonates with your audience? So I think that's the first. In the event that there isn't an awful lot of content, you've got different avenues. Obviously, you've got teams internally. There's some great external people that you can use. There's lots of great third-party websites that can create content for you. There's great journalists that I use that create great content. And then there's, we create content for our clients as well. We create stuff as and when required. So I think there's a lot of answers to that challenge, really.
Yeah, exactly. It almost seems a little bit like a menu. There's something in there for everybody, right? Like several options, several solutions to the problem.
Correct.
Fantastic. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges that is facing ABM right now?
One of the biggest challenges, well, probably going back to your point around technology. Mm-hmm. I think that's a major challenge, because a lot of companies are being led by technology first rather than strategy first. So I think trying to untie that, we very often have to try to untie that when we're talking to the market, because there's also a separation very often in companies between who is delivering the strategy and who is purchasing the technology. And so sometimes that kind of conflict, in a way, is, hey, we've been handed this technology, we now need to use it, or hey, we've got this intent data platform, we've got this automation platform, we've got this CRM or whatever. How do we tie all these things together? And as you said, then create the content, create the value proposition, create the account experience, engage the accounts, measure the impact. There's an awful lot of moving parts. We always talk about ABM very much being a journey, but we also talk about ABM very much being around orchestration. There are a lot of moving parts. It's almost like a film, in the sense that you've got a director, you've got actors, you've got lead actors, you've got supporting actors, you've got the best boy who's obviously holding the grip, you've got you've got the editor in the studio, you've got the executive producer who's checking the budget and making sure that no one goes over budget, you've got the studio head who's going crazy about the director's choice of leading actress, etc. There's an awful lot of orchestration out there, and that orchestration then, that's one of the challenges of ABM. And so very often what we find is, when companies come to agencies like ourselves, they have a couple of challenges. They've got a resource challenge or they've got a knowledge challenge. And so typically, because ABM is relatively new, and at the same time it's relatively complicated, agencies like us exist trying to solve those two issues, really, helping people with resources, and helping people with the knowledge that they need to be successful. Because there's a lot of companies trying to do ABM, but they may be running some tactical LinkedIn paid into some target accounts. They may be running some direct mail into some target accounts. They may be doing some outbound sales into some target accounts, but they're not joining all the dots together and they're not orchestrating it. And then probably they've probably chosen the wrong accounts in the first place because the sales director said, these are the accounts, or the CEO said, hey, I like these logos, please go and win them for me, which very often happens in a lot of companies that they have a certain obsession with certain logos. And obviously, we try to kind of demystify a lot of this and try to use data to inform a lot of the decision making. So I think those are some of the challenges that I see out there.
That's a handful in terms of the challenges. And, I love the Hollywood movie set analogy, because that's just probably like sums it all up quite nicely. Like, all this stuff that's going on behind the scenes that people don't see on screen. Right. So,
and that's without mentioning the audience who've actually watched the film, right? So
yes, absolutely,
and yeah,
absolutely. For these next two questions, Declan, I'm going to ask you. I mean, if you were in London, I'd ask you to go to Hyde Park and get up on your soapbox and start preaching there. But a commonly held belief or a status quo in the area of ABM that you passionately disagree with, and why?
I suppose, well, there's a couple of things. One, obviously, is the similarity that people kind of say there exists between demand gen and ABM. That's probably one that I'm pretty passionate about. And I think, I'm not, I have no wish to disrespect any demand gen work. And I think there's some amazing, amazing stuff being done out there in the market, and I see some really, really great campaigns being done from a demand gen point of view. But I think it's a very different discipline to ABM, and that's not to say that the two do and should coexist in the company. This is not a binary choice, and I don't. Sometimes people think it is a binary choice. But it's definitely not a binary choice. Both demand gen and ABM should coexist. And indeed, there should be a crossover in terms of what demand gen creates and whether or not any of those accounts that get created through demand gen, whether they warrant being fed into an ABM strategy. That's a very solid approach, really. So I think that's one of the things that I see a lot out there, is that kind of mixing the two together, when in fact they are very, very solid separate disciplines that coexist within an organization. I think that's number one. I think number two, obviously, is that ABM can be done for any type of account. And I think because technology, and we've been talking a lot, Christian, about technology today, because a lot of these technology vendors say, hey, you can feed, 5,000 accounts or 10,000 accounts into this beautiful, Willy Wonka machine. And then the Willy Wonka machine will spurt out a whole bunch of different types of chocolate flavor. And we all grew up watching that amazing film. But that's not the reality. And I think it's very disingenuous to think that you're doing ABM at that level. Account-based marketing, as the name and the discipline started, is treating one account as a market of one. Now, while I can accept that the purest definition of one-to-one ABM with deep personalization, trying to win a multi-million-pound account, has been extended and amplified over the course of the last few years to embrace one-to-few, where you're looking to target, 15, 20 accounts at any one time, what we call clusters, where they have similarities, be it they're in the same sector, in the same industry, they've got the same business driver, the same business challenge. You can do that, and then you can do a level of personalization. When you're trying to run, ads, content syndication into thousands of accounts, that's just good demand gen, in my opinion. And I think those are the two things for me, really.
Yeah, no, it was really great. For you to elaborate on that a bit further and to draw a line in the sand, so to speak. But and I love the Willy Wonka analogy. You forgot to mention the Oompa Loompas, behind. Well,
I was trying to think of the name of the lead actor, actually, whose name's escaped me, actually. But
well, there was the original version, and then there was the Tim Burton version. So depending on which one you're referring to. Right. Kind of like the closing remarks, this piece of advice that you'd give would-be clients out there that are, contemplating, using companies like yourself for their ABM initiatives. What is one thing that you think they should start, and one thing you think they should stop doing when it comes to ABM?
Well, I think My answer will probably depend on where they are on their ABM journey, whether they haven't started yet. Because I mean, typically when we kind of survey the market, the answer tends to be kind of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, i.e. 1/3 haven't started, but are contemplating starting. 1/3 are in the early stages of ABM, and obviously 1/3 are much more mature, 12 months plus. But each one of those three groups have different needs when it comes to ABM. So, and we obviously as an agency help all three of those groups. But I think if somebody's looking to think about starting, I suppose my two pieces of advice would be: one, get as close as you can to your sales leaders. Talk to your head of sales, your VP of sales, your sales director. Get as close to them as possible. To what accounts are they trying to win? And what challenges are they finding when they're trying to win these accounts, or trying to it may be that they're actually stuck. And it may well be that when you talk to the head of sales, they might tell you, do you know what, we're fantastic at winning accounts. I mean, I was talking to a recent, Let's Talk ABM podcast guest, and they were explaining to me that their sales team are fantastic at winning accounts, but they're not great at expanding accounts. So you go to all this effort to win an account, but then you've got so many more opportunities within the account. And that's where ABM can really come into its own, is this kind of whole land and expand. So get close to your sales directors, your sales leaders, find out where they are having the greatest challenge. Is it in winning, or is it in expanding accounts? And do the impossible to help them with that. You as a marketer will know what to do. You'll know some of the key areas that you can help them with. So that would be my first piece of advice is that. And then my second piece of advice is, and this is something that it's a question actually I asked all of my podcast guests as well, and the resounding answer from everyone is start small. Start small. Don't try to, go, don't have your eyes are bigger than your stomach. Try to have a pilot, a select number of accounts, perhaps for a one-to-few campaign where you're targeting a cluster of an industry that you're interested in, or a business challenge that you can solve, etc. Start relatively small. Test. Jennifer Lever, who heads up ABM at Bazaar Voice, which is, she's one of the great ABMers out there. She has a great expression, which is, crawl, walk, run. And I think that's probably a great lesson for everyone is just get that kind of rhythm going. And going back to the analogy around running a marathon, you've got to get your step. And once you get your step, then it feels a lot easier. So I think that's probably a key part as well, really.
And stop?
What should they stop doing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think they should stop seeing marketing as being, a bastion, a silo in its own right, really, and try to be a little bit less defensive of marketing. And I think the thing that is most encouraging about doing ABM is that all these walls come down. Mm-hmm. All these walls come down, and you start building really, really strong relationships with your sales colleagues, with your customer success colleagues, with your operation colleagues, with the C-suite as well, with your CEO, CFO, CEO, whoever's out there. You start building some fantastic relationships there because of the fact that you're all working together on a set of accounts. Right. And then everyone is celebrating those accounts. And I think that really becomes infectious. It really starts everyone to kind of start celebrating together. And so it's not so much, hey, marketing have done that. We just launched a fantastic billboard, or we're just on Times Square or whatever. That's all very good and dandy, but it's actually about, hey, what are we as a business doing? Yeah. And then everyone celebrates. And I think that becomes really quite contagious, really, and quite infectious. And everyone really gets hooked on moving those accounts through that ABM journey.
Absolutely. That was some pretty solid advice, and thanks again for sharing that, and thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise and experience with the listeners. I really hope that they, like myself, have been taking notes and that they walk away from this getting tremendous value. So, Declan, please do us the honor of telling us a little bit about yourself and how people can get in touch with you. And rumor has it that you're quite the linguist.
Well, I'm not sure. We had a conversation before, Christian, and I think you can probably beat me on the number of languages. But I'm passionate about languages, and I've studied a few, and I speak a few. So it's one of my passions. But in terms of I've been involved in sales and marketing for at least 20 odd years. I'm now living in the mountains north of Madrid, and I don't think anyone will remove me here from Spain. I'll end my days here in this beautiful country. And just to find me, obviously on LinkedIn, Declan Mulkeen, and obviously I'm the CMO of an ABM agency, Strategic ABM. So I'm sure you can find us there. And I run a podcast that, Christian, you've listened to a few episodes of, called Let's Talk ABM, and it's one of my passions as well, is just talking ABM to other people out there who are leading the charge, really. So Christian, thanks once again for inviting me, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Declan, for your time, and take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Likewise, Christian.
Okay, bye for now.